This video is a recap of my conversation at New Era College today around some overarching strategies and constraints for higher education institutions in Botswana. The application of these ideas goes beyond higher education institutions and beyond Botswana. I'll be going through this in a fair amount of detail. I urge you to feel comfortable to fast forward or play at a higher speed. What I'm going to talk about is presented a bunch of research we've done in large corporations and higher education institutions. And that is this, that success these days is highly driven, especially in higher education, around three core things. One is strategic velocity, the ability for your organization to develop and execute a strategy faster. Secondly, efficiency, how well you take advantage of your existing assets and resources. And then finally, funding, what it is you're doing to fund growth and current operations. I'm going to take you through each of these in a bit of detail. So the first topic I want to touch on is better strategy or strategic velocity. And here's the issue. The issue is we need to set and execute on our strategy at the speed of change, not the speed of your higher education's course calendar. Many higher education organizations we work with say, let's wait until the end of the semester and then we'll have this conversation. The dilemma is the world is changing faster than that. And if you wait until the end of the semester, it's very likely you're going to miss the opportunity or someone else is going to grab the opportunity that you're hoping to achieve. Let's take a look at this. And this is not specific to Botswana, but if we take a look at what Advocate Boko has said in his State of the Nation address, he describes the opportunity here is about taking the road that's unseen, that it's a new world that we're moving into here in Botswana with the new government and the new direction that we're taking. And the opportunities that are open to us might not be immediately visible to you. What does that look like for higher education? If I take a look at his State of the Nation address, he talks about a bunch of things which are specific opportunities for us to leap on. Thing one is about implementing youth empowerment. And the idea is this, that if you in your higher education institution are not already developing a strategy to respond to what he wants us to do around implementing youth empowerment, we're losing that opportunity. What does that look like? Maybe another college or university is going to set the policy and the direction. Maybe another university or college is going to develop what needs to get done and meet that need. He talks about vocational training and apprenticeships. Again, it's an opportunity for us to support the government and also take advantage of the gap that he as a politician is seeing. He talks about strengthening the education, the job market linkages. Again, that is something that your strategy should be jumping on and beginning to work against. And I can go on. He talks about educational improvements. He talks about modernizing agriculture. Obviously, we've got a role in helping make that happen. He talks about encouraging industrial growth. We've got a role in making that happen. And finally, he talks about enabling, the fourth industrial revolution, which is both going to impact us on how we deliver higher education, and we're going to be impacting what can happen in this country as a result of that. So again, the imperative here is we cannot wait till the end of the semester or your next annual strategy process. You need to begin taking action on these things right now in order to take advantage of the opportunities and make sure that you're fulfilling the obligations that you have to the country. So let's drill into this in a little bit more detail. If we take a look at that whole strategy execution process, it's fraught with problems. Now, here's the thing. Your strategy, its job is to help you determine what are the outcomes that you would like. You describe that in your strategy, your mission statement. To get that, you're going to come up with your strategic plans, the plans of what we're going to do. Based on those plans, you're going to take some actions. Now, I've shown these arrows as a one-way direction, but actually they're both ways. What does that mean? It means, for example, as you take your actions, those actions are both going to inform whether you're able to achieve those outcomes and also inform whether your plans are correct or not. Maybe your actions are great, but because your plan is wrong, you're not going to achieve the outcomes you're looking for. So these things are interconnected, but the dilemma is there's three broken parts of this in your strategy. Thing one is that there's a knowledge gap. There's a difference between what you know and what you need to know to have a great strategy. If I were to pick on Trump for a second, there's a huge problem there. There's a gap between what you know of what he's done or what he plans to do, and what he might do tomorrow, what you actually need to know in order to develop an effective plan. We call that gap the knowledge gap, and therefore your plan will never be perfect. It doesn't matter how long you debate your plan, whenever you release it, it will automatically be out of date. And obviously, the longer you debate your plan before enacting, the more out of date it's going to be. Gap number 2 is what we call the achievement gap. The achievement gap is a difference between what you think your systems and people are going to do and what they actually do. And what that gap results in is that, the people and structures are never going to accomplish what it was that you had planned. And therefore, again, whether your plans are perfect or not, you're still not going to get the outcomes you want. And the final gap might be the biggest gap of all, and that's the effects gap. The effects gap is what we think our actions are going to achieve versus what they actually achieve. And because of that gap, we can never accurately predict exactly how the world's going to react to what we do. So, for example, if you drop tuitions, does that increase the number of students you have? Or does it tarnish your reputation and you get less students? That's the effects gap. And the issue is these gaps exist, and taking longer to form your strategy or taking longer to execute it does not close any of those gaps. In fact, the longer you take, the bigger each of these gaps are. So thing number 1 you need to think about to be successful going forward is we need to compress your strategy gap. I always think of sports. So think of football. When you get on the football pitch, you have a strategy in mind. But based on whatever the other team is doing, your strategy has to change. You can't lock in that strategy because as you begin to learn more and more about what your opponent's doing, you're going to have to redeploy your players in a different way. And so that strategy we understand is agile. You're not going to wait till the end of the game and then have a meeting with your team to discuss the strategy for the game that's already done. The second thing we've seen is that even with the strategy in place, the management processes themselves are too slow. So I'm going to describe here what I'm going to call the modern management process. This isn't, as Peter Drucker described it in 1960. This is the realities of what we're seeing in our global clients. So you start off obviously with your strategy. And from the strategy, we need to take that strategy, which is a 5-year or 1-year strategy, and break it down to what do I need to do this quarter in order to achieve that annual strategy. So I'm shortening the time period so I can get a better grip on what needs to get done this week, this month, this quarter. We call those objectives and key results. And this structure, or frequently called OKRs, are what organizations that you think of that have risen to success use. Facebook, LinkedIn, Slack. These organizations are using OKRs. They are breaking their strategy down, not for a year, not for 5 years, but for a quarter or less. Now, based on those OKRs, we then need to align our daily operations. Day to day, people need to know is the work that they're doing links up to this month's objectives, and that links up to the overall corporate strategy. Once we do those daily operations, you as leadership need to monitor those activities. And I'm going to monitor both those daily activities that are linked to OKRs, but also just daily check-ins, other things that are happening, the barriers and blockages that stop employees from being successful. Those might be things like access to the systems after hours, early access to the office, more use of tools like Zoom and Teams and so forth, things that don't necessarily fit in your strategy, but become barriers and blockages to success. And we're going to monitor all these things. Example here is think of the dashboard of your car. If your dashboard wasn't giving you ongoing data, you wouldn't know when you're running out of gas. You wouldn't know when you've taken a wrong turn. You wouldn't know when the engine's overheating. We need to monitor those things on an ongoing basis. Now, the difference between your car and you as a driver and the organization is the team that you work in. So once we've monitored it, we now need to have meetings. And I can't emphasize enough, the success of your organization will be dependent on how well you run those meetings. Many organizations think of meetings as a complete waste of time. That's a problem with how you're structuring and running your meetings, not because the actual idea of a meeting. For a second, think of it this way. A meeting should almost be like a piece of machinery where problems go in, answers go out. And the problems that go in are problems that require all the brains in the room. So if you're having an operations problem, I better have operations people in the room. If I'm having a registration problem or administration problem, I should have those people in the room. So often we have the wrong people in the room. And what does that look like? People are sitting there idle, watching time fly by. They should not be in the room because we're not taking advantage of those people. The second thing is this, that to make meetings effective, people need information before the meeting. What we've learned in our research is this. If you're in a meeting and someone gives you a spreadsheet, the recommendations you come up with have about a 30% viability ratio. That means only 30% of them are actually viable, that they can be implemented in your organization and they'll actually make a difference. If, on the other hand, you get that spreadsheet a day ahead, it takes you the same amount of time to read it, but now you have enough time to think about the recommendations you might make, meet with your team, consider your options. And now when I run the meeting, the recommendation moves from 30% up to 70%. So almost twice as effective meeting just by giving people the information ahead of time. So meetings become that problem-solving tool inside your organization to make sure that you're getting great recommendations and a little bit more. I now know what's on the agenda, so I know who to invite. I know what my participation is expected to be, and so forth. So now I've got the right people in the room. I monitor the organizations and give them that right information. Like driving your car, I have the dashboard in front of me. The outcome from that meeting might be that you need to update your strategy. You might discover that whatever's happening means your strategy is in the wrong direction. You may find that instead of updating the strategy, I merely need to change the tasks that people are working on this month. And once I change those tasks, they become part of our daily operations. Finally, maybe in managing it, I see that it's just a short-term problem that I solve in a daily stand-up. So describing this model for a second, we think of it as a flywheel. Think of the front of your car as a flywheel. It's a big weighted wheel that as it spins around, it equalizes the energy from your cylinders. So if you didn't have it, when one cylinder of your car would fire, your car would lurch forward a couple of feet. Then it would wait, the next cylinder would fire, your car would lurch forward again. To smooth that energy out, the flywheel works. You really have 3 flywheels in your organization. This inside flywheel with your daily or weekly check-ins, that's going to go once a day. You have the second flywheel with tasks and key performance indicators that will go, we'll say, once a month. And then finally, you've got the strategy flywheel that will go once a quarter. In other words, there's a different cadence for each one of these, and you're managing a different level of gravity. Obviously, in that strategy conversation, we're managing big chunky things. In the monthly meeting, the less chunky things, and then day-to-day operations in the daily, weekly check-ins. And now different organizations have a different cadence. So we work with trading floors and IT departments. They've got daily meetings. We work with companies that are manufacturing large skyscrapers or nuclear power plants. They don't meet daily. We meet the most frequently they meet is weekly. So different departments and different organizations have a different cadence, but the important message is here that your organization is definitely running with these 3 different flywheels that go at different speeds. You need to sort out how frequently you have to have these ongoing check-ins, how frequently you need to have those bigger objective type meetings, how frequently you need to have these even bigger strategic conversations to stay on. And changing your meetings so that you've got the right information going in and their meetings will be more productive and running at the right cadence are going to enable that faster strategy execution that I talked about. Now, I'm going to move from this conceptual diagram to what does it look like in a more mechanical sense. In a more mechanical sense, you're trying to improve each of these things in small steps. So I'm going to make a small improvement to my strategy and implement that through my objectives and key results. I'm going to make a small improvement in those objectives and key results so that I make a small improvement on how I do my daily operations. Once I've got a little bit of improvement in daily operations, I'm going to slightly improve how I monitor the business. And then I'm going to slightly improve how I manage my meetings. And then from there, I'm going to, slightly improve how it is I update my strategy or update my tasks or update check-ins. So this flywheel concept also includes how we improve processes. We don't have to stop the world and come up with an awesome strategy process, or stop the world and come up with an awesome OKR process, or stop the world and come up with awesome daily operations. Each one of these things is continuously improved bit by bit, day by day. Because this flywheel is moving frequently, you have an ongoing opportunity to improve each one of these things, see what the results are, and figure out where the next constraint point is. So, for example, if everything's working well except for your meetings, you're going to put your energy just in meetings. But if you're not cascading your objectives down to OKRs, and you're not doing daily operations, your monitoring system is broken, and you're not managing very well, there's no benefit in fixing in any one of those. You need to fix all 3 or 4 of them on an ongoing basis. I'll tell you the same story slightly differently. Inside your organization, you really have 3 types of meetings: tactical meetings, operational meetings, and strategic meetings. So a tactical meeting, think of that as like a weekly stand-up meeting or daily stand-up meeting. In that meeting, you're going to spend about 80% of your time reviewing the organization's performance and about 20% taking corrective action. And that goes on every day, every week. Once a month, you have a slightly bigger meeting. In that meeting, we're actually going to stop and spend a little bit less time on performance, a little bit less time on action, to create time to talk about the implications. So in a football metaphor, think of this as when you're on the field and you're busy talking to the other players, forwards, talking to midfield, talking to defense, and we have this ongoing conversation. At halftime, you're going to have a flip chart session with the manager, talk about overall what we're seeing, what the implications of that are, and how we might want to change our strategy for the second half of the game. And then we run the second half of the game with that knowledge. So typically organizations are run quarterly. So think of having a meeting at the end of every month as a typical example. And you probably have meetings like this already. The newer meeting is a strategy meeting. So imagine taking a look at my monthly performance, take a look at the strategy and those conversations and assumptions I used in forming the strategy. And what that meeting looks like is we spend a little bit of time talking about performance, a little bit of time talking about implications, from the operational meetings. But most of the time is talking about the strategic issues. What's happening, again, because of Trump, because of, new government policy here in Botswana, and what changes I might need to make to my strategy based on what's happened in the world in the last 3 months. Now I run the next month with that new model and do the same thing again. And I run the next month with that new model and again, adjust it. Run the next month with that newest model and again, adjust it. Now, what we see here is this organization had 4 learning cycles where last year you only had 1. What does that mean? It means you're more agile in the marketplace. As Trump comes up with his next bizarre scenario, or we get a bit more clarification on the government's policy or where the funding is, we can adjust. We don't have to wait till the end of the year. Now, anyone that's been in business for the last 5 years understands that things don't nicely work on this quarterly time cadence. A simple example is with COVID. COVID did not wait till the end of a quarter to conveniently have that lockdown occur. It was in the middle of a period. Once you've built this machinery, people understand how to do this strategy retrospective and refresh. You can turn that on at any point in time. So inside your organization, there'll be trigger events, things that will indicate that your team had better get together and have this conversation, which might be a merger in your business, or someone drops out of the business, a new competitor shows up, Trump comes up with some other bizarre policy, or we have better knowledge about government policy here. In any and all cases, this mechanism allows us to be more agile and adapt to those strategic opportunities faster. So this first part of the conversation, I've talked about the need for strategic agility and what does that look like in organizations. And the important thing to note is globally, organizations are doing that, and that's going to make them more effective at competing in your country. And in fact, if you do these things, you're more effective at competing in their country. So strategic velocity is an important thing. That muscle needs to get built in your organization. So I can go into more detail on strategic velocity later, but I want to move on now to efficiency. Efficiency is how can you make better decisions to optimize on the resources you already have at your disposal. And the biggest gap we're seeing there is people are not using data to help drive their decisions. And the issue is we do need to better leverage what we've already built. In the Botswana environment, I'm thinking back to the educational opportunities that I described to you from President Boko. And we've got many assets at our disposal. We have underutilized universities. We've got ability to put more students in those buildings that we have already, with those instructors we have already. But we also have a number of campuses which are not being used anymore. We don't need to spend years coming up with new assets. We have to spend our time to figure out what we need to be teaching our young people and how to get them better taught. That's better utilizing the resources which already exist. I'm going to share with you a bunch of examples from some work we've done at various universities, and I'm using these only to prove and provide evidence to you that these things work and they're easily done. So at UCLA and San Diego, one of the things that we began doing is helping people do what we call multimediator models. And the purpose here is to do educational reform. Now, those are a lot of big, clever words. What am I talking about? Well, what we began doing is taking a look at the activities we do, the action. Remember that first diagram where we've got actions in the bottom right corner? So those actions we take are things like how our teachers teach in front of our students, how we take advantage of multiple technology. So multimodal education. Am I using smart screens? Am I using online learning tools? Am I using YouTubes? What are all the different resources I'm using that I've already invested in? The different rooms, different styles of rooms, different laboratories. What are we doing in terms of supporting and coaching our leaders? And most importantly these days, how we're utilizing AI. And the reason I say AI is most important is AI is going to be what calculators were 40 years ago. 40 years ago, if you were writing an exam, the instructor would say, you cannot take your calculator in there. You must be able to do the math in your head. Well, how crazy does that sound today, 40 years later? Could you imagine ever going to an exam without your calculator? No, because you've got your calculator with you every hour of the day. It's in your phone. I never need to learn how to do that mental math anymore. I still need to know about square roots and multiplications and divisions and differentiations and all that kind of stuff, but I don't need to have the mathematical multiplication tables memorized or square root tables memorized. I have them on my phone. That's where AI is going to be in literally not 40 years time, but maybe 4 years time. It's going to be omnipresent. Every time you write an email, it's going to check your email for you. Every time you text on the phone, it's going to take a look at the text and not make those stupid spelling corrections it makes right now, but not only correct your spelling, but correct your tone and voice in that email. And that impacts what education looks like, because I no longer need to teach those concepts to our children. I need to teach them about creativity and concepts and that sort of thing. We also took a look at the outcomes. So how well do the students perform, not only on the test, that's important, but not critical. How well do they perform in the working world? We take a look at teachers and teacher evaluations, administrative policies, all those outcomes. And by taking a look at that data, and that data is all available to you right now. None of this stuff is, you got to stop and collect. It is available at your fingertips. You're merely not using it. And what we found is we could very quickly change the content of courses, for example, from the technical stuff that I taught 5-10 years ago to the concepts and creativity that's needed these days to leverage AI. Ultimately, we saw a significant improvement in the educational outcomes. Now, I'm putting this forward to you as an example to say you have this data already. And data is now what diamonds were. If you think of De Beers, the way that they've created value for diamonds is by hoarding them, by buying all those diamond mines, even mining the diamonds, but not releasing them to the market. And they keep the prices high. The new diamonds is data. When you have data, you have that raw resource that everyone needs. I'll give you a couple of examples. Think of Uber, or what is it we call it here, Easy Drive. The idea is they have all sorts of data about who's driving to where, what time of day they're going, Are they taking extra luggage with them? Where they get the biggest tip, etc. And all that data would allow many different organizations to make different decisions. If you're a driver, obviously that's going to help guide you on what type of vehicle you might buy, where you might choose to locate yourself in the city, what hours you might work. But even in other services. So, for example, at the airport, maybe they need to know how best to do their layout, and having the data will help them figure out how to create the right traffic lanes, etc. Or that all that development going on around the airport. Again, sorting out who's going there and what that market opportunity is. If I take a look at Netflix is getting all sorts of data about what, or whatever that movie streaming service is that you use. They have an abundance of data about who's watching what, when, what those demographics are. That data are the diamonds. That's the raw resource you have to make better decisions. And in our educational systems, we have piles of data, piles of diamonds waiting to get harvested. We began taking a look at how to get both students engaged and professors. We are experiencing a high professor turnover. How is it we can use data to make better decisions? And we began taking a look at, and we asked our teachers to analyze student performance and begin addressing what those learning gaps are, and begin making rapid experiments about different techniques you could do. Now, what began happening is the professors began asking the students, they're saying, hey, students, how can I help you learn better? And the students actually began coming up with better ideas than the professors. Your customers often know more about your products than you do. And in this case, we're bringing the customer, the student, into the equation. And what we found, and then encourage them to do rapid experiments. So the students might say, we'd work better if we weren't in this darn classroom, or if we're outside walking around having a conversation. Okay, let's try that tomorrow afternoon. Or if we use more online training, fine, here are the YouTubes you should listen to before our next session, etc. And what we found very quickly is we significantly increase student participation scores, student learning scores, and most importantly, student grades and engagement. And the fun part about this is the students participated in these experiments and drove their ownership of the answers even higher. Again, it's an example of how we've got immediately, if this is stuff you could do tomorrow with data that you have available today. Other examples. We began taking a look at policy development. And this becomes super important here in Botswana because we are having some new policies. We need to get involved in how those get developed. What we did is we began taking a look at data sharing agreements with the government, with regulators, with industry, and with researchers, so that we began to understand what classes were being most creative, where were opportunities for us to collaborate. And we began setting up little tiger teams to begin making policy recommendations back to the government. And what we found here is those evidence-based policies were passed much faster by regulators and government because they understood where and why it was a great decision. At this point, if you don't participate with President Buko in these decisions, his government has to make these decisions blindfolded. That's not fair to them, it's not fair to the country, and it's going to serve you less well because you haven't helped form the policies that you already know would be better. Another example. How do we optimize the use of our facilities, optimize the use of our faculty, and our programs? You've all developed great programs that don't have students attending them. Again, how do I optimize that? There are three aspects of the analysis you need to do. One is obviously the utilization. So, when is the classroom used and not used? When is the lab used and not used? If you're running a hospital, when is the operating room used and not used? And begin optimizing the scheduling process and avoid bottlenecks. Second is the actual faculty. How is it we monitor the faculty to make sure that we've got the right skill sets, the right skilling, teaching skills, etc. And this is both to make sure that they're more effective in what they do, but also to minimize burnout. And then finally, the effectiveness of the programs themselves. So evaluate whether those programs are attracting the students that you intended to attract them, and whether they're actually meeting what the industry, what market demands are. And we found that this analysis gave us almost a 50% increase in the utilization of your facilities. Think of instantly doubling the size of your campus. That's what it does. It also gives a significant reduction in staff turnover and so forth. Now, you can see I'm just layering on examples of where you've got this data available. There's no reason why you shouldn't be doing this. In fact, you could assign this to students as student assignments, and they'll learn far more than some of the crazy case studies you're currently giving them. I'm going to give you two more examples. When we were working with Georgia State, we tried to reduce student turnover. We identified 8, and this was done again with the SAT students at the school. We tracked over 800 risk factors to help identify students who were dropping out and what those risk factors were. We began to intervene with targeted support around the highest, the top 10 risk factors. And what we found is we could increase graduation rate by 23%. So, reducing student dropout and increasing their success at school. Again, this is all data that you have available to you already. At Iowa, we began focusing on how can we improve administrations. If you think of the student fair that you're just having in the last 3 days here in Botswana, each university gets 1,000 applicants, but only 200 choose your university. How can I improve that ratio? Well, what we need to do is begin to discover what are the choices? Why are students choosing the universities? And they're probably not choosing it for the reasons you would think. Maybe you think they're choosing it because you've got a higher need from the marketplace. But maybe they're choosing it because you've got a nicer campus, you've got better social environment, because their friends are going there. There's a whole bunch of criteria that they're using that you're not considering as you begin to promote your school. And so beginning to analyze the demographics, their interests, and so on, you can make a significant increase in your enrollment numbers. Now, my purpose here is to say you don't need to reinvent things. You don't need to develop new programs. You don't need to build new buildings. Chances are all those things you already have are being underutilized. What I need to do is figure out how to utilize those things better. The final thing I'm going to talk about is funding. Now, this is particularly important in the education environment, but it's important everywhere. Now, I'm going to move on to innovative funding. And if you're trying to figure out my accent, I'm Canadian. And in Canada, we have the same problem 20 years ago that you have now. 20 years ago, our government subsidized virtually all university education. Now it's almost zero. And we've made that transition that you now need to begin making because the government can't afford to begin funding all that work. And we know with a 30% unemployment rate of the youth, whatever funding I'm currently doing is directed in the wrong place. I'm still missing 30% of our students. I did a seminar with some of the New Era college students a couple of days ago. At the beginning of the seminar, I asked the students to raise their hands if they thought when they left the college they're going to open their own business, be entrepreneurs. And almost every student put up their hand. And as we talked to them about it, the reason is they have such a low assurance they're going to get a job with a government or with a corporation, they know they need to find their own way. So the model of what students are looking for is different. And the funding that we currently have is not meeting that need. So I'm going to quickly go through 10 funding models that we're beginning to see globally that you might find useful here in Botswana. And I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail and spell them out for you. If you want to know more, feel free to email me and I'll just go through it in even more detail. So, private-public partnerships. And what those are is collaborations between your educational institution and the private sector to fund specific projects, research initiatives, and so on. So, for example, at New Era, I saw some wonderful work coming out of the STEM labs about how I can manage a greenhouse with AI. Well, as cannabis becomes legal and that becomes a growing market here, how is it we can help not only the institutional farmers, but every farmer begin to move into that market and take advantage of that gap, which again is stated in the State of the Nation address as an opportunity that's available to us. Obviously, companies are going to collaborate with the universities if you're directing your research in those useful ways. So at UCLA and at the Berkeley campus in particular, we managed to not only do research externally, which is an obvious thing, but even do things like how to get better student housing, how to get better research facilities. Income sharing arrangements. In this case, we're allowing students to enter the college at a reduced rate, but they'll be paying for their fees in the future. So instead of upfront tuition fees, they're paying for it when they're actually creating money. Now, if you think about it, how we currently do it is crazy, right? The students have no money. Their parents maybe are subsidizing or the government's subsidizing. In this new model, the student can pay for their own education. So, again, at Purdue is a good example where we're using ISAs to help students finance their education to almost 80%. Crowdfunding, we all understand crowdfunding, but in this case, what we do is identify specific initiatives where we're letting the population support it. The example would be if I go back to my first one of specific projects, let's say we're doing a project about growing cannabis, but isn't intended for institutional agricultural corporations, but rather small individuals. I get 10 small individuals contributing to projects that will help a small individual do this. And again, a GoFundMe helps fund that. I don't need government support. Social impact bonds are where we're asking the government to support almost the same way, to invest not in just granting the student money or granting the university money, but we've got predetermined outcomes we're looking for. We want an an architecture department to work on better roads, or mechanical engineering to work on better gas stations, or whatever that might be. And the idea is government will fund those things which are in the interest of government, but they don't have the resources to go execute on. Again, what the government's doing is taking advantage of existing assets to get the things that they're looking for. An example of this we had in California, just to give you a non-educational example. In California, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, we were doing some work with them, and their concern in social services were about the number of homeless people living in Los Angeles. And their dilemma is they needed to build more soup kitchens to help feed them, but they didn't have the money for it. What they actually did is they went to some schools and said to the schools, hey, you got a cafeteria that isn't used in the evenings. Can we use that to feed the homeless in the neighborhood? Because inevitably there was a school in whatever the neighborhood where the homeless people were. And the schools said yes. But they said, but we've got a culinary school. Can we have some of our culinary students actually cook up the food for the homeless so that they can get real life experience about cooking food and how to cook for 100 people at once, not just in that classroom environment. So the school benefited because they're getting hands-on experience, and the city benefited because they got the use of that asset that was paid for but not being utilized. They extended that to inner city where there are corporations who had cafeterias, and they asked the same thing. And the corporation said yes, but can our executives serve the food to the homeless? Why? Executives often lead by authority. They're the boss and they tell people what to do. They needed to learn how to lead by influence. And when an executive is serving a homeless person, the homeless person doesn't care that you're an executive. The only way you can communicate with that homeless person and convince them to do something, move into a shelter, take a college course, whatever that might be, is by influence, not authority. And that's a skill set that leadership team needed. Again, both gained. The city gained by getting access to the cafeterias, not having to build soup kitchens, and the businesses gained by getting that important skill set for their executives. So again, I'm emphasizing the sort of social impact contract. There's obviously corporate sponsorships and partnerships where we're looking to leverage sponsorships for specific things, which may not have a specific directed outcome, just like research, but we're moving in that direction. The example here is where Starbucks began sponsoring universities on the understanding the universities would give early acceptance to Starbucks employees. Endowment funds is something that you've probably already considered. Harvard's, the example there, where they've got billions of dollars of endowment from their alumni that are helping them move forward. And likewise with alumni giving and fundraising campaigns, what we do know is that alumni are more likely to donate to their own university than, in fact, almost anything else in their lives, unless they've got someone with a specific illness. And the idea here is we need to begin recognizing that the alumni are a specific group that we need to cater to, have events where they can join, even if they're in Zimbabwe or anywhere else. Have those get-togethers for your university, and eventually you'll see they'll repay you. Obviously, another opportunity is just commercialization, where instead of just doing research and writing research papers, we have more directed research and development activities with the specific goal of not writing another paper for accreditation in a periodical, but doing research that will result in a patent. And that patent, we can then get revenue, help our students create spin-off companies, and so forth. Auxiliary enterprises is where we're providing non-academic services. So, for example, renting out your football field, or allowing the campus housing to be used in your off season, or allowing retailers into your campus, but they're going to pay you for that access. And green bonds are where, and I'm speaking specifically about green bonds here because we've one of the State of the Nation areas to talk about is that environmental consciousness that we have. Specific bonds putting forward around projects both on and off campus, which are about sustainable energy. Again, this is something that's of interest to the students, interest to society, and government here is trying to lead. Now, you can look up this information to understand in a little bit more detail going forward. The core ideas I wanted to share with you is your organization needs to have better strategic velocity to be able to set and execute the strategy much faster and make course corrections much faster. Secondly, you need more effective decision making to better utilize the resources you've already invested in, the campuses, the people, the facilities, and so forth. And that's often based on data that already exists. There's no reason why you cannot begin doing that tomorrow. And then lastly, we need to remove the constraint of thinking you're dependent on the government for your funding. You are not. And there are many innovative funding opportunities available to you that will help you better capitalize on the assets that you have and help the organization sustain itself into the future. I hope this conversation has been useful and informative to you. Whether you're in higher education or not, these concepts are pertinent to your organization. If you have further questions, I urge you just to send me an email, and I'll be happy to direct you to other assets that might help answer those questions. Thank you for your time.